Yeah, so just from my previous military experience, as we're getting over the Gulf of Mexico, seeing some of the military training areas, they do a lot of it over the water, and just seeing some of those flares being punched off by some of the military, like the Air Force aircraft. Yeah, it gave us a little bit of fireworks along the way. I mean, we were well clear, miles and miles away from it, but just seeing that again, it kept us active and something more to talk about for us. We're operating and you just kind of take for granted what else is going on in the airspace until you see something like that. So it was amazing. And then it really gets down to the controllers too, what they are viewing. It's not just our Cirrus going across Florida. They're managing a whole bunch of other aircraft out there.
That's Luke Fischer talking, and in a moment, we'll talk with him about what it was like buying a 2016 Cirrus SR22 in Miami, Florida, and then flying it across the country with me to get it to Palo Alto, California, where it's now for rent at the West Valley Flying Club. Also during the flight, we tested Lightspeed's wireless headset called the Tango, and I tested the tracking and satellite text message capabilities of the Garmin inReach, which we use to talk with many of our Patreon supporters during the trip. So please stick around to the end of the show to hear my reviews of those devices after our conversation with Luke. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots like you to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott. And of course, if you have any interest whatsoever in buying a Cirrus SR20, SR22, or SF50 Vision Jet, or would like flight training in one, I talk with several listeners every week who call me for advice on next steps, or sometimes about the trade-offs of buying new versus used Cirrus aircraft. There's just a lot of different things I can help you with, so please call me today at 650-967-2500 for a free consultation and possibly a free demo flight. Now, last week in episode 130, we talked about a deadly crash of an SR-22 in Southern California. So if you missed that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you have found value in any of our shows, well, please consider supporting us with a small monthly donation billed to your credit card through Patreon. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. And Patreon members get lots of goodies. For example, last week they were able to track our flight across the country in real time and talk with me in flight via satellite text messaging with their suggestions for the flight. So join this awesome group of supporters today by going to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome and become one of our awesome supporters. Now here's our conversation with Luke Fischer. And now let me tell you a little bit about Luke Fischer. Luke is a former military helicopter pilot. He served in the U.S. Army, where he flew a variety of helicopters and served in multiple overseas combat deployments. He has a Master of Science in Management from Stanford, and he now works as head of flight operations at Uber. He holds an ATP for rotorcraft and a private airplane certificate. Luke, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I'm equally as excited. I've been a long-time listener of the show and a great fan, and obviously enjoy flying with you, so I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we certainly had an awesome trip coming back from Miami, probably one of my favorite trips ever of these long cross-country dashes across the country. But let's kind of come back to the beginning. Let's talk about why it is you happen to be buying an SR22, and how do you plan to use it?
Yeah, so I've got a Cirrus SR20 with a partner, and we use it as a lease back. And as we're looking for what's next, the SR22, a little bit bigger, can carry a little bit more, was just ideal. And especially flying around the Bay Area where there's so many great sights to see, and that aircraft is just phenomenal for getting people and things, wherever you want to go. We want to use it. Personal use obviously as well, but then, being a member of West Valley Flying Club, I want other people to enjoy the aircraft. And it just seemed like the perfect fit and the perfect timing to get an SR22, have the club use it and have myself use it as well for hopefully years to come here.
Well, and we're happy to have another beautiful airplane available for rent. Tell me a little bit about the buying process. How did you go about that? Did you have any help from brokers, or did you pretty much go about figuring it out yourself?
So the buying process was interesting to say the least. There's a ton of paperwork. There's a lot of people involved in it, and having the experience from buying another aircraft just a few months prior, kind of knew the steps to take. But we did use a broker on this one, and it was really helpful. I learned a bunch of lessons from the previous one, just the basics. Just like when you go and check your aircraft on pre-flight to make sure the required documentation is there. That's kind of a good guideline. Your registration has to be set. You have to have insurance, the airworthiness certificate. So we started going through, and a lot of dialogue back and forth. And also the big piece of buying this aircraft is the pre-buy inspection, which is absolutely essential to get right. And I had a good dialogue actually with the mechanic that was doing the inspection. So maybe every other day we were dialoguing about, it only took about 4 or 5 days to do the inspection on it, but just about the little things that would come up. And, you want to kind of get the first look before you really go all in on getting the aircraft and spending money. And, for us, traveling across the country to go see an aircraft. So we wanted to make sure everything was set before we went out there. The broker was extremely helpful. And then just a dialogue with the owner as well, setting up the actual day of events. It was great and a great host. And it was a good trip.
Oh, it certainly was. Talk a little bit about the features of this particular aircraft. Cirrus has obviously come in a lot of different flavors. What does this one have or not have on it?
This SR22, very deliberately, one of the key factors I wanted to look at was the useful load in the aircraft. So this one, if my memory serves me, 1,256 pounds of useful load. And that is a lot of weight to get, people around and have, some fuel for some really great trips. So the useful load was important. And obviously, this aircraft was based in Florida, so it had a hot weather package. That was also something I was looking for. And it's a trade-off. Do you want, hot weather package and thicky aircraft? And, that starts driving down the useful load. So I wanted something that could fly a lot. We're in California. The weather's pretty nice most of the time. So having some AC over some, anti-icing capability came to the top of the list for me. So it's got the air conditioning package on it, and then just a great useful load. And then other than that, it's a, standard 2016 G5 aircraft, which is, one, it's beautiful. Cirrus does an absolutely outstanding job just with the comfort features. Everything from the remote keyless entry to the lighting and, the cup holders, and just a beautiful aircraft. So that was the primary, again, useful load, and then having the ability to have the air conditioning here because it does get hot in California.
Sure. Yeah, and so this airplane was normally aspirated, didn't have turbocharging, and of course it was a clean wing, so there was no TKS panels whatsoever on it. And that had a couple implications for our trip back west, one of which was we had to make absolutely sure that there was zero chance of encountering ice because we had nothing available to deal with that.
Right, and that was something as I was talking to some aviator friends around the area saying, hey, I'm going to go to pick up this aircraft and fly it across country. Like, oh, that's going to take forever because the icing and this and that and the weather. And I'm like, yep, I know. But yeah, it was a big factor. And the flight planning that you and I both did was very deliberate, got very detailed on all the weather reports because we knew that could have been a potential significant delay to our trip.
And it all worked out, though just barely. Depending on the timing, there was weather that cleared out in time. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So anyway, let's talk about Thursday morning. We arrived pretty early at Miami Executive around 7:30, and you did a heck of a lot that day. Tell us about all the stuff that happened on Thursday at the airport.
Yeah, so Thursday we pre-coordinated with the current owner, who was very accommodating. He kept the aircraft in a hangar. So he headed out. He knew we were on a timeline that we wanted to meet and get out and start flying this aircraft if everything went well. So he headed out ready for us outside the hangar. He was making sure the databases were correct. The XM weather subscription was there. So, really thankful for his hospitality there. So we got there and then we started the inspection. Obviously it was awesome having you around, one of the most experienced Cirrus pilots I think there is, and really rely on your expertise in walking through a very detailed pre-flight. So we went through the pre-flight. We found some minor issues which were taken care of. On the left-hand brake, we had that inspected and cleaned up a little bit, and that was really not a factor as the mechanics were literally right across the hangar. And then the one interesting note which we were talking about is the tail number. The owner he chose a special tail number for some significant milestones in his life, and he wanted to keep his original tail number, so he swapped the tail number. But we saw a couple different numbers on the documentation, but again, it kind of made the spidey senses go, what's going on here? But then the owner explained it, and it was all in the logbook, so nothing out of the normal. Then after that, we went, took it up for about an hour and a half. Really put it through its paces, just made sure every little widget on it was working. And we did a variety of instrument approaches and just standard maneuvers, and then found out it was a great aircraft. And that I think was about the easiest part in the the buying process, because then once we landed, said, hey, we'll take it. Then came the paperwork and making sure it was registered, and the funds were released from escrow, and just being across the country in different time zones. The partners that I acquired the aircraft with meant they were up really early, and it was just a matter of time, and paperwork eventually came through, but it was several hours before everything was there. And again, going back to those basic elements of the pre-flight, making sure the registration was correct. We had the insurance correct on it, and then we were clean and free, and no one was at risk, and the aircraft was ready to go, and it was in our possession at that time. But I mean, that took, I think, 4, 5, 6 hours of just kind of waiting around and waiting for the paperwork and the electrons to catch up. And again, the owner was absolutely accommodating and let us hang out in his hangar, and we got some food to eat from just across the runway, which was great. Yeah, then it was ours, and it was time to go. So we had plenty of time to plan and look at that weather and making sure the icing levels weren't going to be a factor, or if there was any weather along the way.
Yeah, and the evaluation flight that you and I did, was kind of interesting. I couldn't find a single squawk with it at all. Everything absolutely worked. We flew both an ILS, we flew a RNAV GPS approach, we touched every button in the airplane, and it was just so nice to see that it was in just perfect condition.
Yeah, and it was really interesting too, as we were flying over the Everglades, very different from Bay Area flying, where it's hard to find an area where there's no other aircraft around. And it was a great scenario to really put it through its paces. So yeah, I really appreciate that thorough evaluation.
Yeah, so we finally got on the road right around 3:00. We had an aspirational goal, which was to make it to Beaumont, Texas, which is a heck of a long ways away. Before we took off, I gave a kind of a short briefing that said fatigue might be a major risk factor. And of course, it was late in the day, 3:00. We had just come from a different time zone, may not have slept quite as well the night before. So, fatigue really becomes, a common factor on all these really long trips. And what I said was that either one of us could say, hey, we are done for the day. And we also talked about stopping if we needed to go to the bathroom, and said, you know what, the same thing applies to that as well, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, something we've flown together before. However, the crew coordination between us, I think, was very, very thorough. We kept each other updated about how each other was feeling. And again, even the bathroom break thing, just making sure we're monitoring hydration. Again, I felt completely comfortable. I know you did as well. If we're to say, hey, I want to land now, I'm tired, or I'm feeling a little fatigued, no issue in raising that. And I think that's a really important factor, because those underlying stressors can come up in, I'm sure, different cockpits when you're flying with someone you don't have a lot of experience with. You may have some hesitation to say something, but we didn't. I think our dialogue, really kept us safe during the whole flight. Really effective crew coordination.
I was just thinking, I think a key benefit we had going for us was you planned for this trip to be on a Thursday, Friday, and I think a lot of people, when they buy an airplane, they would do the same trip on Saturday, Sunday, with this goal of absolutely having to be back home on Monday. Whereas you and I kind of knew, hey, we got 2 extra days built in, and really took a lot of pressure off.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't feel any stress to get home, like, hey, I have to be home Friday night. It was enjoyable. And that was the thing, where it just felt good. Like, hey, we'll get home when we get home, and we'll play it safe through the whole time and evaluate all the variables that come in. If we need to stop, we'll stop. And that was a simple decision that we could have made.
Now, the first leg was really nice from a weather standpoint. I mean, it was essentially clear the entire way as we flew toward Beaumont, Texas. My notes here are that we had about 4 to 5 knot headwinds most of the time when we were going. But what are your recollections of that particular leg?
Yeah, my recollections are that it was really beautiful, just flying literally the whole, from Miami all the way through the panhandle of Florida, and just having the benefit of great weather, nice and smooth. And then just being able to watch the sunset as we're flying, I think, just over the Gulf of Mexico was absolutely beautiful. And just, it was enjoyable. We knew what we were doing. We're talking to a bunch of different controllers and getting handed off. And I think each one wanted to know our destination. I think we were repeating that multiple times, but it was at least gave us something to talk about in flight as well.
Yeah, and I finally asked a controller if he had a little time for a question. He said, sure. And I said, virtually every controller has asked us, what's your destination? And my understanding of air traffic control systems is that destination is supposed to be right there in the data block as you move from one controller to the next. And the controller said, well, the appropriate question they should have been asking is, how are you navigating to your destination? And so it just seemed that maybe they weren't asking us the question that they really wanted to know. And I guess in that part of the world, Yeah, some people cut across the Gulf of Mexico, and so that's a pretty reasonable question. You and I, we wanted to say feet dry the entire way, so we did not go over the water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other big piece for me on this was, really flying an SR22 for the first time. Just, seeing the value of your fuel monitoring and the efficiency at which you can operate that aircraft was outstanding. Again, Cirrus did an excellent job, and we're following the procedures and making sure we were leaned out correctly, and really looking at our destination and evaluating if we need to stop along the way. What options do we have? What services do the airports provide? And, again, the IFR planning as well, in case, unforecasted weather came up. We were constantly evaluating the weather along the way. And I really, it was really valuable just staying on top of that. Keeping us active and, keeping us planning, I think, was also helpful.
It's true. We were constantly evaluating our destination, whether or not we were going to make it. We had a lot of great tools for doing that. And we had a lot of good backup airports. So I think Lafayette, Louisiana was one backup that's about 100 miles short of our destination. Lake Charles, I believe, was another one that we looked at. So all along the way, we knew we had multiple good places we could go to if things kind of became adverse and we weren't going to make it. But I think one of the biggies is very early on in the trip, we throttled back. My notes are that we were around 60% power, and we were anywhere between 11.5, 12 gallons. And boy, that really gives you tremendous endurance when you're carrying 92 gallons.
Right. And I continue to be amazed at that as well, just seeing the endurance we had in the aircraft. And again, not just relying on one number or one instrument to tell us that, but the multiple options we had for fuel planning, whether it was our portable electronic devices, our phones, the aircraft fuel consumption, just everything was adding up absolutely correct, and the numbers were working out. So it was great to see that that comfort in knowing it's multiple options that we're having for the fuel planning.
Yeah, the nice thing is that the Cirrus version of the G1000, which they call the Perspective, has something different, which you don't find in typical G1000 aircraft. And in the upper right-hand corner of the MFD, which would be right smack in front of my eyes, it constantly updates you on FOD, fuel on board at destination. And so it was pretty easy for me in particular to constantly watch what was happening to that number as we got different winds. And we had a goal of making sure that we landed with well over an hour's worth of fuel. And it was very easy to monitor that the entire time. And in fact, we landed and we had about 19 gallons on board, 19.1 as I recall. And so we very much did that. In fact, that would have been at 11 gallons an hour. That would have been close to 2 hours of fuel on board. And that particular leg was 6.2 hours. So that's a new personal record for me.
Yeah, definitely me too. And it was enjoyable, and it was really great to see those numbers work out.
Yeah, and as we went by Pensacola, we saw a number of military operations. I had never seen aircraft shooting flares before. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so just from my previous military experience, as we're getting over the Gulf of Mexico, seeing some of the military training areas, they do a lot of it over the water, and just seeing some of those flares being punched off by some of the military, likely Air Force aircraft. Yeah, it gave us a little bit of fireworks along the way. I mean, we were well clear, miles and miles away from it. But just seeing that, again, it kept us active and something more to talk about for us. We're operating, and you just kind of take for granted what else is going on in the airspace until you see something like that. So it was amazing. And then it really gets down to the controllers too, what they are viewing. It's not just our Cirrus going across Florida. They're managing a whole bunch of other aircraft out there. So it was really neat seeing the whole ecosystem working.
And we initially flew at 3,500 feet, and we were at 3,500 for, probably 5 hours, I would imagine. And then my recollection is that we went IFR at the very end. We were just starting to pick up a little bit of clouds after dark along the shore there, and it was not going to be possible to know for sure whether we were going to stay out of the clouds. So we just picked up an IFR clearance, which was easy. I mean, the only thing that really changed substantially was we were now 500 feet higher.
Right. And that was, again, great training as well, where the temperature and dew point, if I remember, we're getting pretty close, and we're on the coast. So we just knew we needed to get the pop-up IFR clearance eventually. And we did it, when we wanted to, and instead of having to do it. So we had that, and it was great flying that, and climbed up a little bit and just basically continued on. So it was very easy.
Yep, definitely. Well, so we made it to Beaumont, Texas, which was pretty cool because we didn't really know for sure whether we would make it there until perhaps about an hour before we got there. Then it was pretty clear based on looking at the winds aloft from Sirius XM that nope, they weren't going to be changing between here and there, and we clearly had enough fuel to land, so that was excellent. And one of the things we have found useful, at least in my trips, and you probably saw this as well, was help from the FBO. So they were helpful, I guess, in identifying hotels and things like that.
Yeah, again, just that's what I love about flying across the U.S. I've done it a couple times in helicopters, and you just get to meet the personalities. But the FBO at Beaumont was very accommodating. They even offered to drive us to the hotel and whatever we needed. They gave us the phone numbers, and it was, the hospitality was great. So we felt like we were kind of just part of the family there, and passing through. But their advice turned out really great, and it was a nice little fuel stop for the night.
Well, and we agreed after we got there that we would not get up at the crack of dawn on Friday because we were looking at some weather. And so it really didn't make any sense to get up, be tired, and then have to wait around. So I'm going to go ahead and run our conversation, which I recorded over breakfast. Here it is.
Well, did you look at the weather yet today?
I did, yeah.
What kind of conclusions have you drawn?
So just looking at the weather just west of us, we've got about 50 miles west of us, nice little front coming in, front line with some thunderstorms. So, bouncing around that, I think we've got some outs to the south. Definitely going to be, cloud cover, likely, IFR routing out of here. And then,
if we go, for sure it's IFR, I think, because it's just going to be...
Yeah, just the cloud levels. Yeah, just looking at that, you can see that band coming through. If we get routed around it, might be a little bumpy, but, I think we can probably skirt to the south a little bit and then head on west. I think once we get out of there, then another an hour into the flight or so, it'll probably smooth out a little bit. That's what I'm hoping.
Have you looked at icing?
I have not looked at the icing levels yet.
Well, we got two different things. We got freezing levels, but then we've also got the SIP, the current icing forecast product, and that shows a fair amount of ice at 9,000 feet in New Mexico and Arizona.
Okay.
But it looks like as the day wears on, there's lower and lower probability of that.
Yeah.
And it looks like there's the least amount of it along the southern border. So to me, it looks like if we were to head to El Paso, that kind of sets us up in a good place to kind of sit and wait until the icing clears out, and then we could proceed most likely VFR. I think that if we were to go IFR, it's going to put us at higher altitudes.
Right.
Give us a lot less flexibility to avoid, ice and clouds. But we'll just have to wait and see what the clouds look like at that point in time.
Right. Yeah, and it'll be El Paso, just around 4 hours or so. So it'll give us plenty of options too for fuel that we'll have on board. For deviations, which is obviously flying in IFR conditions. It's probably a pretty good idea. Have some outs and see what happens.
Well, and the really great thing about El Paso, they also happen to be a Cirrus service center. So,
I didn't know that. There we go.
If anything ever happens, it's like, we've got, and I actually did have a flap repaired there one time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we landed and the flaps would not retract. And it was a Saturday morning and the service shop was still there and they fixed it in about an hour. And
that's perfect.
We were on our way. So, worked out great.
Yeah. Being a work day on Friday, it'll be even better. Get in there because I'm sure folks are there.
Yeah, in fact, here's a recommendation I make for owners. When you fly across the country, keep a list of service centers with you, and even consider just flight planning from service center to service center, because it's going to make it really easy if you happen to have any kind of issue.
Yeah. Is there a nice list somewhere? I'm sure on the Cirrus site.
Yeah, online.
Link to it. Yeah. As a new Cirrus owner, I'm getting used to that. So that's great.
And I was just thinking there's probably a way to take that list and create a file that would show up on the ForeFlighter Garmin Pilot so that you can actually
overlay it.
See those. Yeah, exactly. Someone's probably done that already.
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think I was texting Nelson this morning. I was like, hey, we made it. 6.2 hours. Aircraft flew great. He was like, one stop or no stops? I'm like, one 6.2 hour flight at a minimum. He's like, how'd you guys do that? We leaned it out and power management and really on the fuel option. So it's really, the benefits of flying with someone like you that's experienced, knowing what the aircraft can do and not just full throttle. Let's go as fast as we can. Let's blaze through. Let's talk more about smart flight planning.
Sure.
That's great.
Yeah, go as fast as we can. We might still have gotten here, but we probably would have gotten here later because we would have had to stop for fuel, lose an hour, and you would have paid a lot more for gas.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's actually the smart play is just to slow down, lean it up, and just sit there and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one thing too on we'll go through again today, but the leaning procedures and the benefits and looking at the different, I think that'd be helpful for me again as an owner. Understand it, but just want to make sure the ins and outs and the process would be great.
Yeah, so the POH for the Cirrus is going to tell you how to lean it both for rich of peak and for lean of peak operation. Now, for lean of peak operation, you can't be at full power. You got to be 65% power or less. But still, if you're looking to save some money and go more efficiently, you're not going to be at full power anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
All right, so that's what we thought was going to happen on Friday. And actually, it turned out that it was pretty close to that. We didn't leave until about 10 a.m., and we did depart IFR. So talk about what the weather actually looked like when we departed.
Yeah, so looking at the weather, we knew we were still in the morning time. We knew the longer we waited, just the possibility of thunderstorms building in that East Texas afternoon. So we got a late morning start. And we looked at it and we saw that there was going to be precipitation. Without a doubt, we'll be in IMC conditions. So, we got our clearance at Beaumont, took off. And then just like we predicted, the weather and all of our planning that we did ahead of time turned out to be exactly what we encountered. And, we went IMC pretty quick, had a good plan. We knew we had, a bunch of outs. The controllers were great about vectoring us to the clearest weather. It was a little bumpy, but again, nothing that was outside of our comfort zones. And then we knew based on, again, the information provided in the aircraft as well as on the iPad with ForeFlight looking at the weather, everything added up. Looks like we're going to be in the clear shortly after takeoff. But again, great experience to actually go IMC and on a long cross-country trip. And we knew we got out of it. And then actually, I think got out of it sooner than what I thought. We could start seeing the ground breaking through pretty quickly. And it was just a great, pretty much a great fall, absolutely a great flight after that. Yeah, as we transitioned to VFR flight later on.
Yeah, we had a line of thunderstorms that was probably no more than 20 miles west of where we took off from. Unfortunately, when we looked at the radar returns, they were all green and yellow. We didn't have any orange, which would indicate possible convective activity. And there was no sign of any kind of lightning throughout the area. And initially looked at, could we get around it? And actually that line extended so far in north and south, there was no way we were going to fly out of our way to go around it, which meant we had to go through it. And I was actually shocked. I mean, we had a couple of bumps, but it was remarkably smooth for penetrating, a frontal line. And the rain only lasted for seconds at a time. So we were very lucky in that regard. We looked at a couple of different apps. I was using the AeroV app because I love how it displays the skew-T soundings. And so it showed that we had clouds from around 2,000 feet up to about 8,000 feet as we were departing Beaumont. So I knew that before we were going to leave. When we looked at the winds aloft, we could see that it was advantageous to stay down low. And so we just flew at 4,000 feet most of the way. A lot of folks say, well, why didn't you, climb up higher? And the answer is, yes, it's possible we might have gotten on top of that weather, but we'd have encountered monster headwinds. My recollection is that those headwinds were going to be as much as 40 knots if we had climbed up, and that certainly wouldn't have helped at all.
No, not at all. And I remember, again, using all the tools we had, that lower was better for us, and we made some great time for it. And yeah, it's just a trade-off, but we were constantly looking at weather and what altitudes would give us the most efficiency for it. And so I think we worked out very well for us. So I think our flight plan did us well.
Well, obviously, it's important to be able to not only keep the aircraft in good shape with fuel and oil, but also keep the pilots well supplied with food as well. Tell us what we did along the way so that we would assure that we wouldn't waste any time finding food when we got to El Paso.
Yeah, because we knew that we wanted to be as efficient as possible, taking advantage of the services that FBOs provide. I think sometimes people forget you can call them up and they're always accommodating. So we looked up Atlantic Aviation at El Paso. I had my Bluetooth headset connected to my phone, so I called Victoria at Atlantic and said, hey, here's our tail number. We're about an hour out. what do you recommend? And she had a couple options right away because, again, they get this question all the time. And, I had her place an order for us. And again, she was very accommodating, very nice. Atlantic Aviation did just an outstanding job. And so we knew we had something waiting for us, not only important to fuel the aircraft, but fuel ourselves as well on the journey. So we had some sandwiches waiting for us. So it was great to get that.
Well, we also had a little fun while we were at El Paso. I had been there before and had seen that NASA keeps their Super Guppy, which is just a huge, monstrous airplane there. And unfortunately, it wasn't there, but we did get JR, who is a longtime employee there at the Atlantic FBO, to take us around and give us a tour on the golf cart. So do you want to talk about what we did see?
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was really exciting to see that, where JR gave us a personal tour of the airport. And as we rounded, I think, some of the corners for the hangars, seeing this monstrous seaplane, yellow and white, and it was in it's in various stages. I know it was missing at least one engine on there that they're working on. But we got this inside tour of the seaplane, and I don't remember the nomenclature of it.
Yeah, that was a Grumman Albatross. So essentially, the largest, certainly civilian seaplane, and a lot of them were formerly in military service for search and rescue.
Yeah, and so we saw that, but right before that, we saw I think it was an experimental aircraft that had 4 unique engines, 2 on each wing, and they were very low to the ground. I think NASA used it and never really, no pun intended, took off in popularity just because the engine clearance. So it was really neat. We got this look at the historical aircraft that were around there, but the Albatross, having the ability to go inside it and look at it. I mean, it looked like an old sailing ship on the inside with the bunks and the layout of the crew compartment. It's just a beautiful aircraft. And they said it was going to fly, I think next year is the goal, March 2020. So I'd like to keep tabs on that and see where that leads.
Well, it was lovely, and I just couldn't resist the temptation to go all the way forward, climb into the pilot's seat, and just take a look at all the dials and switches. And that was certainly a real treat.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit different than the aircraft we were flying, but yeah, definitely gives you a really good perspective on the avionics and how much they've changed over the years.
Well, for the next leg, we decided that our aspirational goal was going to be Palo Alto, California. And that's one, frankly, where I thought, pretty good chance that we won't make it all the way. And the big issue initially was weather. We were looking at a lot of icing on the original icing forecast when we left in the morning. But as it forecast, by the time we arrived there at El Paso, it had pretty much largely cleared out. So we did have some clouds around 6,500, kind of broken, well, actually probably less than that, scattered clouds over El Paso. And so we decided to go ahead and depart VFR. Freezing level was around 9,000 feet. So we knew we really couldn't fly IFR. So that meant our best option was to do what we could to stay low and skirt the clouds. But it was kind of interesting. We had some challenges getting out at El Paso. We spent a long time in the run-up area there. And you want to talk about some of the things that we saw going on next to us there?
Yeah, it was really interesting. As we were in the run-up area, we did all of our preparations for takeoff. There was a Southwest jet ahead of us taxiing, and then an American jet came up, and then a small Cessna as well. And as the controller started talking and giving the clearance, you could tell there was a controller that was in training. And as the Southwest jet got to take off, they were cleared to take the active. And then almost immediately the controller said, "Oh, wait, stop." But the pilot said, "Hey, it's too late. We're already over the line." So, he couldn't put that thing in reverse. So he cleared him for takeoff anyways. Well, not anyways, but he got the appropriate clearance, had to divert some other traffic, and that Southwest jet took off. So we kind of thought, okay, there's small mistake, but then they just started continuing to make some what some folks could think of as small errors, but could really lead to some safety issues. And the controller in training was backed up by another individual in the tower that he would jump in at some moments. But then, as we were waiting, we thought we were next. There was an American jet that took the active as well, was given the takeoff clearance. As they started on their roll, they got told, "Hey, abort takeoff." And so they spooled back down, slammed on the brakes. We could see them. And then, the controller cleared them for takeoff from their present position. But I thought, as you and I talked, the pilot of that American jet did an outstanding job by saying, "Hey, we've already spooled up. We've already eaten up some of the runway. So rather than being pressured to fly and take off from his position. He said, "Hey, we're going to taxi around and use the full length." So I thought that was great. So I thought that was going to be our cue to take the runway, but the Cessna that was waiting was in the American Jet's taxi run-up area. So they cleared the Cessna ahead of us. That Cessna took off. Then the American Jet came back, did the run-ups, and while we were waiting, they told us to continue hold since the American had a priority takeoff. So we were waiting for quite a while and listened to all of it. So eventually the American Jet took off. And oh, by the way, I think we waited for, I don't know, felt like half a dozen aircraft to land. Then we finally took off. So it was a lot of time, a lot of frustrating conversations with the controllers back and forth from the various aircraft, but eventually we got out of there. So some really interesting topics, but again, really good aviator decisions that were made by those pilots on the really all the aircraft that were coming in and out of it.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of other aircraft that were on the other runway, which I think was 26, and those two runways intersected. So, for example, I know at one time an aircraft that was cleared to the other runway was told that they were not able to do touch and go, and that they had to turn and keep their turn north of the runway that we were on, so that one of these airliners could get out. So they had a lot going on. The American Airlines pilot, I think his quote was, "Not cool. We were fully spooled up." So he was pretty annoyed. He was, I think, justifiably annoyed. But, if, like you said, if one of these things happened, you would have said, okay, fine. But boy, we saw two aborted takeoffs, one right after the other, which kind of told us, either they were too busy for the staffing they had, or maybe they just were not, having their best day.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. But again, the professionalism of the pilots, I can only imagine what the internal conversations were in those cockpits, but externally, everyone was very professional. And I think everyone knows that, people are learning, but at the same time, there has to be some sort of level of what's acceptable or not. So, but again, everyone got out safely.
Yep, it all worked. It was all safe, even though it was a little weird. But let's talk about our routing. We actually flew at 7,500 feet all the way through New Mexico and Arizona, which is the lowest that I have ever been able to make it through there. So why don't you tell folks about the special routing that you found that would get us through those states?
Yeah, I was really interested in looking at, the different routes, because there's a whole bunch of restricted areas, a whole bunch of airports that we were, not want to deviate too much. By the way, we didn't want to fly too much off of our route to deviate, because we knew there was icing, well north of us, and, we wanted to stay in the clear weather. So, found a small airport, Alpha 39, that looked like a good one to avoid some of the other traffic. And then we had some restricted areas as well ahead of us before Big Bear. And, I think good training, I created a user waypoint, and we're discussing, what should we call this area to avoid the restricted area? And I said, well, let's call it avoid. It's pretty self-explanatory for what that meant. And that routing from Alpha 39 to the avoid waypoint I created had us on a really good and efficient shot to Palmdale. And again, we were at 7,500 feet, and, looking at all the planning and the higher elevation around us, it just seemed to work out really well. But again, I was amazed as well. We stayed right on it and got to Palmdale, and then started heading north.
Yeah, so essentially we started with a straight line from El Paso to Palmdale, and then we needed to avoid the Phoenix terminal area in the Class Bravo there. So A39 kept us just far enough south to avoid that. And of course, then you kind of rubber banded us around a couple of other points. Tell folks about how you were using both your iPad. I know you were testing out Garmin Pilot interactively with the flight plan in the Cirrus Perspective.
Yeah, it was one feature that I really, really liked was the flight stream feature in the Perspective aircraft, or the SR22 aircraft, and the ability to sync with the iPad and the portable electronic devices. So I was using ForeFlight for most of it and Garmin Pilot. What I was able to do was look at some other airports that would keep us on an efficient path and just drag and drop them on my iPad, which was synced up via the flight stream product from Garmin to the cockpit. And so when I would make a change on my iPad, I would just sync it with the cockpit. It would give us an acknowledgement of, hey, do you want to change your route? And that's a good safety feature too, because you want to make sure the pilots are aware. And hit acknowledge on the Perspective, and then it updated our route. So just the flight planning was absolutely efficient. So didn't have to twist any dials, didn't have to input any user waypoints, literally drag and drop rubber band feature on ForeFlight, synced it with the flights via the flight stream product. and our routes were going very efficiently after that. And then we were able to do the reverse as well. When we did make some changes on the perspective on the avionics, it would sync back to my iPad, so we're always in touch. And that to me is amazing, the ability to do that and just within a couple button clicks modify a route and make those changes on the fly, pun intended.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that the flight stream in the Cirrus can handle 2 different devices on Bluetooth. So I had my iPhone connected to it, and so you could make a change on your iPad. It would update then into the Cirrus flight plan, and then it would offer me the opportunity to have that downloaded to my iPhone. So it really didn't matter where the changes got made. They just kind of bounced around through all 3 of our flight planning systems.
Yeah, and I can see how that can be. We had great weather throughout this leg, but just seeing how valuable that product is. If there's time is very tight, or you have to make some decision, just being able to rubber band that via ForeFlight and sync it with the cockpit. I mean, that can save minutes, which is absolutely essential for flying.
Well, and we did stay at 7,500 feet all the way through Southern California. We could have stayed at that altitude, but it was a little windy as we were approaching the Tehachapi's, and I thought maybe an extra 1,000 feet might reduce the odds of getting rocked and rolled. And we had avoided that pretty much throughout the entire trip because, once again, it looked like we would have higher headwinds if we climbed. And by the time we reached the Tehachapi's, it was pretty clear we were going to make it home, and we did make it by about 8:30. Turned out that was another exactly 6.2-hour leg. Of course, I think the reason is we probably spent at least 20 minutes in the run-up trying to get out of El Paso.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Once we got to Palmdale and started that northern turn, we knew, again, with all the tools we had, that the numbers were working out and we had plenty of fuel to make it to the destination. And we kept on our crew coordination about how we felt, because that was a long day. I think both of us felt, very comfortable. Again, if we needed to stop, an hour away from Palo Alto, then so be it. But we didn't have to. And, the weather was in our favor, which is absolutely remarkable. And we made it home that night. So it was fantastic.
Well, and we had a lot of comments on Facebook as people were following the trip, and I'll also talk in a few minutes here a little bit about some of the satellite text messaging that we did. But one of the comments when they looked at the fuel receipt, and here I thought they would look at how many gallons we had left, they looked at the price, and somebody said, "Oh, you could have found cheaper gas in Texas than $5.40 a gallon." Talk about why fuel price was not really a major consideration as we were making our trip across the country.
Yeah, fuel price is one variable. But what also comes when you pay a little bit more in fuel, you're also going to get better service for some aspects of this when you go to a bigger FBO. I look back at, if we were to stop at, maybe a smaller FBO or, maybe something off route a little bit, we wouldn't have had the experience with JR. We wouldn't have, had the food that was waiting for us. And so there's some things here where you look at, a couple cents here and there. Over a long run, I mean, that is, that can be important. But for the experience we had, I really value the overall ability to have these services for us. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, fuel prices are important, absolutely, but there's some aspects too that, again, it's one variable, and there's much other thing out there, especially where we were. We wanted a bigger airport for some of our planning factors because we knew the services were there, and we knew that for whatever reason, hotels or food or personnel to meet us and help us out would be essential. So that was the trade-off there.
Yes. And El Paso worked out particularly well since I have a Cirrus Service Center on the field. We didn't use it, but I have been on prior trips where we have had to use the Service Center at El Paso. And I've been on other trips where, frankly, the aircraft had to get left there because of things that happened. And so, yeah, I think there's a real benefit to being at big airports, especially landing at night. For example, years ago, I was with a gentleman who used most of what was probably a 9,000-foot runway because he was unfamiliar with the airplane. So, yeah, big airports, a lot of big advantages.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing with everyone what the trip was like. And what do you think? Shall we do it again sometime?
Yeah, let's do it again. I'm ready. I think I feel pretty good. No, I think just the overall, my takeaway is having, someone like yourself and, very experienced pilot to just evaluate on the new ownership of the aircraft is absolutely essential. And I felt, a lot of comfort as a buyer knowing that, I got a quality product. And then, I learned a lot on that trip as well. And that I'll carry on for the rest of my aviation career. So I want to thank you as well.
No, my pleasure. And we certainly had a lot of fun on that trip. Luke, thanks so much for sharing the story.
Thanks, Max.
Well, Luke is a great guy, and this was one of my all-time favorite trips across the country. And guess what? I get to do it again in 2 weeks when I go to Knoxville to pick up a new Cirrus SR22T at the factory with a client and bring it back to California. So if you have any suggestions for that trip, please let me know. Now, I'll be talking more in a future episode about the Garmin inReach Mini, which I had on the trip. Our Patreon supporters had access to a website that showed our current position on a map, and they were able to talk with us via satellite text messages through the inReach. If you're interested in purchasing the Garmin inReach Mini, it's currently on sale for $275. You'll also need to buy a service plan. And if you do buy one, please use either the link in our show notes or at aviationnewstalk.com/131, because if you do, we'll earn a small fee from Amazon and you'll pay the same price anyway. I'll mention the names of the 25 Patreon members who contacted us in flight and mention some of the things they said, but first let me talk about the Lightspeed wireless headset called the Tango. I've always been interested in trying one, so I contacted Lightspeed and they agreed to lend me one for the flight. Now first, there are two pieces to the headset. There is the headset itself, which looks much like any other headset, except that it doesn't have any wires or cables hanging off of it. And there's a separate dongle that plugs into the headset jacks of the aircraft. There are two versions of this dongle. One has a standard pair of GA headset plugs that are used in most GA aircraft, and the other version has a single LEMO connector, and that's the version I tried. The benefit of the LEMO connector is it takes up less space than the two standard jacks for the traditional headset plugs, and the connector receives power from the aircraft, so it can be used to power any of the common noise reduction headsets that you might buy from Lightspeed or Bose. And the benefit of that is you never have to buy batteries again for your ANR headsets, as it receives power from the plane if you have the LEMO connector. And many modern new aircraft like the Cirrus SR20 and SR22 ship with LEMO connectors. And if you have an older plane, you can have your mechanic or avionics shop add the LEMO jacks to your plane. Well, getting back to the Tango headset, it needs power for both the headset and for the dongle. The headset battery is a small rechargeable battery that lasts up to 12 hours in flight. The dongle uses the same battery, so after a flight you would need to recharge both batteries. But here's the beauty of the LEMO connector version of the Tango headset. Its dongle gets power through the LEMO connector, so it doesn't need a battery. But it does hold a battery, which it keeps fully charged throughout your flight. Then, if and when the battery in your headset dies, you just swap the dead battery in the headset with the fully charged battery in the dongle and you're back in business. This makes the LEMO setup ideal, as you can leave your headset on the plane and you never have to charge any batteries after the flight. But if you have the GA plug version, you'll need to recharge both batteries after the flight. The Lightspeed also has a great backup system. If your headset battery were to fail and you didn't have the LEMO version that keeps the spare battery fully charged, there's a wire in the dongle that you can attach to the headset. And after you connect the wire, the Tango essentially works like a conventional wired headset, though the ANR noise reduction no longer works as that's battery powered. The LEMO connector version also has the same backup wire, though I didn't try this feature, and frankly it's unlikely you'd ever need to do it on the LEMO version since you would always have a spare battery being charged in the dongle. I used the Tango for about 5 hours straight on one of our legs home, and I really liked it. It fit my ears and head comfortably, and it was particularly handy at one point when I had to climb all the way into the back seat. And that's because the lights in our baggage compartment had come on and they were bright enough that I thought they might make our night landing more difficult. So I climbed into the back seat and taped some paper over the two lights so they wouldn't be quite as bright. And the entire time I had the Tango headset on, and it was a real joy not to have to worry about getting caught in any cables, because it's a wireless headset, of course, and there aren't any cables. And I just kept it on as I climbed between the front seats to get into the back. And I could also talk to Luke at the same time as I was doing this. Now, I didn't try this, but I think that the Tango would also be awesome for pre-flighting a plane, especially when there's another noisy aircraft running its engine nearby. Now, often in those cases, I'll wear my headset when I'm outside the plane pre-flighting just to knock down some of the noise of adjacent aircraft. And with the Tango, I'd be able to do that without having to stuff all the cables in my pocket, which is what I currently do. Also, it seems like the Tango would be the perfect headset to bring along when flying as a passenger on the airlines, since again, you wouldn't have any cables hanging off of it. Now, here's some other things that I like about the Tango. First, the stereo mono switch is very large and can be easily moved with your finger. And you may need to set that switch, especially if you're flying in a newer aircraft set up for stereo headsets. So just remember this, if you ever jump into a newer airplane and you can only hear in one ear on your headset, you need to change that switch in the headset. On other headsets I've had, the stereo mono switch is a small dip switch, which is so small that you need either the end of a paper clip or maybe the point of a pen to change it. By contrast, the switch on the Tango is large and easy to move with your finger. I also love how the cables coming out of the dongle can easily be wound up inside the dongle, leaving just enough cable extending from the dongle to reach the headset connector in your airplane. So that's pretty clever. Now, by the way, Bluetooth pairing between the headset and the dongle is already taken care of at the factory. However, if you have multiple Tangos and you worry about mixing up the headsets and dongles, Lightspeed provides some tiny colored plastic chips that you can put on your dongles and headsets so that you can easily identify which dongle goes with which headset. Now, before I flew with the Tango, I read a review that said the audio quality using the Tango is not as good as using a wired headset. And I did notice that the audio did sound a little more tinny on the Tango than it did on other headsets. But frankly, after wearing it for a minute, I totally forgot about the audio difference and didn't think about it again while wearing it for the next 5 hours. So yes, maybe if you're an audiophile, you might not like the audio quality, but to my old tired pilot ears, the difference really didn't matter. I like the freedom of not having any wires connecting me to the airplane. And by the way, the headset is $800. If you do buy one, please consider using the link in our show notes or at aviationnewstalk.com/131, as we'll earn a small fee from Amazon and you'll pay the same price anyway. So check it out, the Tango headset from Lightspeed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, many of our Patreons followed us on a special website, and many others commented on photos I posted on Facebook. So if you're not following me on Facebook, go to the link in the show notes, friend me on Facebook, and that way you can also see the photos I post on my next trip. So here's some of the comments. This was from Alan Groves. He was talking about the long legs we had in the aircraft, and he talked about being exhausted with just shorter legs. He says, how do you do it? And I said, well, we try to minimize our workload in the cockpit by using the autopilot a lot. But perhaps one difference is we have two pilots. I've always found it to be much less fatiguing than flying with one pilot. With two pilots, I'm a little more relaxed as I know that if one of us makes a mistake, the other pilot will likely catch it. When I'm a single pilot, I spend much more energy checking and rechecking to make sure that I haven't overlooked something. And Brian Gibson asked on Facebook, what's your flight plan? And I said to land safely at an airport somewhere. And that really was our goal. We weren't worried about making a particular airport. We just wanted to have a safe flight. Mark Grady, you may know him as a speaker from AOPA. He says, I want to produce a record with you singing In the Air Again. I just can't wait to get in the air again. The life I love is flying a Cirrus for a friend, and that's why I'm in the air again. Anyway, I'm sure Mark hoped I wouldn't sing that, but that was kind of cute. Thanks, Mark. And Jason Bo Sharp was commenting on a photo I posted that showed a frontal line that we penetrated, and he said, hopefully your pre-flight included checking the windshield wipers. Yeah, we did pick up a little bit of rain. Tom Peterson says, why didn't you just hang out for a cup of coffee while that line of storms passed? And I said, well, oddly, later in the day, that line stalled right over our departure airport and then exploded, getting much worse. And if we'd waited, we would have been stuck much of the day. Of course, we didn't know that. I didn't see any orange in the radar returns near us, which would have indicated convective activity and would have kept us on the ground, so we went. Surprisingly, we had only a few seconds of rain as we crossed the line and almost no turbulence, so it turned out to be a good call, but there were no guarantees it would turn out that well. And I posted a night photo, and I said this was a personal record, 6.2 hours on the Hobbs meter, and no red bottle either. And then someone said that they thought, looking at our flight plan, that somehow we had busted the requirements for, they said, quote, 1 hour of reserve. So I responded by posting a copy of the fuel receipt that showed that we had landed with 19.1 gallons. And we'd been burning about 11 gallons an hour, so that was actually nearly 2 hours of fuel reserve. And when I posted that receipt, Troy Wisman said $5.40 a gallon. Yikes, you can do better than that in Texas. And so I went ahead and explained to him, just as Luke explained during the show, that the fuel price is not really our major consideration as we're dashing across the country, because we like all the services that we can get from the larger airports. And I will mention that I remember a trip in the past where we stopped at Indianapolis International Airport. It was with a gentleman who had just picked up a Columbia 400 at the factory, and I think he was curious why I didn't choose one of the less expensive regional airports nearby. But after we landed and he had used up what seemed like most of the 11,000-foot runway landing at night, he understood why I picked the large airport for us to land at night. You know, when people are buying a new airplane, they're not always is familiar with how to fly it. And if they end up high and fast, boy, you're going to be really grateful to be at a large airport. And Josh Youssef commented that perhaps we'd been running about 63% power lean of peak above 10,000 feet. And I said, actually, we were down around 3,500 feet for most of the flight, later 4,000 feet when we were IFR, and our power was around 60%. And yes, we were running lean of peak. And of course, there were comments about the little red bottles that one can bring along if they choose to relieve themselves in the airplane. John Babrick said, I had a CAP U.S. Air Force CFI do that on a 4.5-hour flight once next to me in a 182. Ew. To which I responded to John, I said, yes, I agree. Ew, I have only used my red bottle once, and I was alone in the airplane when I did it. I also said it's difficult to use under the best of circumstances, so I don't like bringing it along with me when I'm helping clients move a plane across the country. Well, I want to thank everyone who contacted me via the Garmin inReach, and let me just mention those Patreon members and some of their comments. So we had 25 people in total who contacted us. Stephen Elop was on his way to London, so I want to thank him for saying hello. Derek Thomas offered us a place to stay. He's up in the Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri area. Now, that was a little far north of our track, so we weren't able to take him up on that. Brian Wade said hello from Indianapolis, where he is a new private, so congratulations, Brian. Bill Crayon checked in, said he was watching the weather on WeatherSpork and was looking at that app and commented that it looked like we had clear skies on Thursday, which of course we didn't have on Friday. Jan and Uta Stumpf gave greetings from Germany, so it was nice to hear from them. Seth Lake said weather was looking good for the first half of the flight. Joey Ferreira from Garmin said, what a fun way to engage your audience, blue skies. Bazem Nimri, who I know back in Palo Alto, wished us a safe flight. Chris Ostrowski said that New Mexico weather tonight was nothing we'd want to mess with, and he's right. We were lucky that it kind of passed overhead while we slept and cleared out in time for us the next day. Carl Kleiderer thought it was neat that Patreons could participate in the flight. David Carter sent us a couple messages. He said he's been thinking about buying the inReach Mini. Brian Deere had a clever suggestion. He suggested that we use our flight path to write the names of patrons. I thought that was kind of funny. So we'd be kind of doing skywriting with our GPS track, and you could read your names if you looked at our flight track. He also had some fuel stop suggestions. And coincidentally, I just had a text message from him this evening. He said, icing ain't no joke. Now, he's on a trip from California to Texas for Thanksgiving, and he said, was VFR under a cloud deck and started raining. I was at the freezing level, saw the drops freeze in the windscreen. I descended and immediately diverted to Carlsbad, New Mexico. All those icing shows you did taught me a lot. It wasn't 30 seconds before I told ATC I was diverting immediately. Nasty stuff. He said, main lesson, always have an out and execute immediately. So, Brian, thanks so much for that good decision. Hope you're enjoying New Mexico, even though it's an unplanned stop. David Mackler said, too bad we didn't make it to Key West. I agree that would have been nice. Andrew Sinclair asked, how do you determine the optimal route plan? And my reply to him was, I look for the most direct route and then choose the altitude based on minimizing headwinds. And at that moment, I told him we had 23 knots of headwind at 4,000 feet while IFR. Ben from ForeFlight, who's a friend of Luke, said hello. Eric Chadwick down in Southern California said hello. He says he's interested in buying a Cirrus. Paris Trivedi, who's in the Bay Area, says, love to know how we handled turbulence over the Tehachapi Mountains. And Paris, I don't recall if we talked about this in the show, but the technique that I have used over the years to minimize turbulence is to put the autopilot on, and you could put it in level mode, but what I like to do is set it up in roll mode, which just keeps the wings level, and then I set it for vertical speed 0. And the benefit of that is that as the turbulence tosses you about, the autopilot doesn't make it even worse by fighting to get back to a specific heading or a specific altitude. And all the ups and downs pretty much average out, so you really stay on heading and stay on altitude for really quite a long time. Mike Gwynn, who's a DPE and a helicopter friend of Luke's, kept us laughing. Mike was very funny. That was enjoyable. Miklos Kazari checked in from Switzerland. Paul Koch said impressive duration on both legs for all tanks involved. I guess he was talking about the bladder endurance. Ben Davis said we might get hit by some headwinds in West Texas, which was true. Wade Jackson checked in. Dirk Dongeiser said that he was tracking us while he was on a commercial flight from Atlanta to San Jose. So that was kind of funny. We were both in airplanes. And finally, Grant Heron from Melbourne, Australia checked in. So altogether, nearly 10% of our Patreon members sent me messages through the satellite text message. And hey, if you'd like to join this great group of fun people, consider supporting us with a small donation through our Patreon page. You can do that by going to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, or you can make a one-time or monthly contribution through PayPal at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And when you do, we'll read your name on the air. And if you'd like to send me an email with any feedback you have, or if you'd like to record a listener question that we'll answer here on the show, just go to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact or Listener Question at the top of the page. And don't forget to tell your friends about this show, because that's how we get most of our new listeners. When people like you tell their friends about the Aviation News Talk podcast. And if they don't know what a podcast is, just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. And there you can search for our dedicated Aviation News Talk podcast app. We've got one for iOS and one for Android. In the App Store, just do a search for Aviation News Talk, and you'll find our free apps there. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.